Well, thank you all for joining us. This is a great turnout for a great guy and an important book, and I'm sure that it's not just the wine afterward that brought you here. I'm Steve Clemons. I'm Senior Fellow and Founder of the American Strategy Program at the New America Foundation. I'm the new Washington Editor-at-Large of The Atlantic, and I'm so excited about today's program. I've been watching Jeremy Ben-Ami move from plateau to plateau for a very long time in the various issues that he's been done. It's a real pleasure to have him here. My co-host for today is none other than Daniel Levy, who is Director of the Middle East Task Force here at the New America Foundation. He has been an official Israeli negotiator in the Taba Accords, and he has been what we would call in Texas a whirling dervish. Maybe that's not Texan, but yeah. He's been a whirling dervish in the whole arena of helping us to broaden the conversation we're having in this country about Israel-Palestine issues, what the context of those issues should be in our own marketplace of ideas and political framing. One of the things that I owe Daniel and Jeremy so much for is that various trips that I've taken to the region and going both to Palestine and to Israel is that the first thing you see in the Israeli press is just how wide and rambunctious their debate is. Far, far wider than what happens in this town. And it's been a commitment of ours at the New America Foundation to try to import that debate, the quality and the feistiness of that debate, so that you could make legitimate asking many of the questions and probing into a relationship without the kind of costs and consequences that have been applied for those who are trying to think broadly about all sides of this interesting and complex equation. Jeremy Ben-Ami, whom all of you know as president and founder of J Street. J Street, in my view, is one of the monopoly breakers in those that have tried to advocate and lobby in the space on Israel issues here in Washington. We can get into that. He's been all over government and civil society institutions. I think I met Jeremy first when you were policy director for Howard Dean's campaign. He was one of the managers of Mark Green's mayoral campaign in New York City. He's been actively involved in Israeli politics and communications for years. He was a senior vice president of Fenton Communications. There he basically helped conceive and really, when I knew him, drew up the blueprints for J Street, and now has written and published this new book, which we have for you for a very reasonable price, more reasonable price than I've ever seen anything from Palgrave Macmillan, called A New Voice for Israel, Fighting for the Survival of the Jewish Nation. So please, along with Daniel Levy, please welcome Jeremy Ben-Ami today. So I'd like to just pose an opening question. This is really your memoir, and I want Daniel to come in at any point, but you're really your memoir, and you're trying to sort of put your paw print on this business, this Israel-Palestine business. As I look at you, I'm going to ask you a provocative question at the front end. If you were a small internet startup that you had done taking on Microsoft and trying to break that monopoly, eventually Microsoft is going to come and try and buy you. Now, J Street is a nonprofit, and AIPAC is a nonprofit, so tax codes theoretically prevent takeovers and co-optation. But in this process of you having launched J Street and taken this very bold move that has had some consequence and has been just a major focus and effort of yours, has there been any softening in that relationship? Have they tried to lure you in? Do they recognize that the monopoly is broken, and so that there are more voices in, and have they tried to sort of make peace, even if they're trying to acquire J Street?
Well, two things I would say. One is that I'm always really clear when I talk about this particular relationship that we didn't start J Street to challenge any one organization or one institution. We are taking on a far greater dynamic than one organization. And so, yes, it is kind of like taking on a monopoly, but I don't like to cast it simply as AIPAC J Street dynamic.
So you're just sort of doing other things but accidentally taking on AIPAC?
Well, I think we're taking on much more than AIPAC. I think that it is the Conference of Presidents, it's the American Jewish Committee, it's the lobbying structures of the federations, it's the network of JCRCs, the Community Relations Councils. It's so much more than AIPAC. And I talk about that in the book, that I think it simplifies it too much. to reduce it to simply the power of one organization. It's a really multi-layered and multi-headed hydra. And I think that the unfortunate thing that has happened is rather than trying to find a way to engage and work together, the response of this monopoly, this many-headed monopoly in a sense, has been to try to squash us and has been to try to shut down the discussion, to try to shut down the debate and to close off the possibility that we'll get the oxygen to get going.
You know, Daniel Levy in the other room just asked you this question in such a British way. He said, in the most potted way, can you tell us what you really want the takeaways of the book? And I don't know what potted means, but I assume it means succinct.
Short?
Yeah, short. But can you give us the potted takeaways that you'd like us to know about why you wrote this book? And when people read it, and there's a lot of emotional and personal history which we can help surface. I want Daniel to jump into. But you know, we have a lot of people who have no idea. Why should they buy this book, and what are the 2 or 3 things that most matter?
Well, I think the 3 key takeaways to me in one big picture item. The 3 key takeaways are the way in which American politics works on this issue is fundamentally broken. And there's a whole slew of myths and misunderstandings about Jewish Americans and their political relationship around Israel. And those myths need to be debunked, and we need to understand the facts of how Jews vote and that they act just like other Americans, and they're actually a very liberal and progressive constituency who aren't going to shift how they vote based on Israel. So that's number 1. Number 2 is that the way in which the American Jewish community functions is deeply broken too. And that is bad for not simply Israel, but it's bad for the American Jewish community because we are driving people out of the community. We are causing people to disengage, not simply from a relationship with Israel, but from their own Jewish community by the way that we act around this issue. So that needs to change too. And 3, and this is perhaps the bigger global picture, that those of us who hold the positions that J Street does and that I do personally when it comes to Israel do this out of a love for Israel. And it goes into great detail in the book, I am the descendant of 4 generations of Zionists who tried to build a homeland for the Jewish people in the land of Israel.
If I may, because I've read this part, it's sort of, you're understating it, calling them Zionists. They're like hyper Zionists.
Right. Really the people who were the pioneers coming in the very early years, the builders who created the cities and the towns and made this country what it is, the fighters who fought for its independence and against enemies who tried to wipe it out. And we've reached a point where the work of all those generations is at risk. And I argue in the book that it falls to us, that every generation has its role in history, and it's for the Jewish people, it's been a saga of hundreds of chapters of generations that have each faced their own challenges. And this is the great challenge of this generation, is to save this enterprise that the last few generations have put so much into, and I think it's been so wonderful. And those who attack us as being anti-Israel, those who question whether or not what we are doing is in the best interest of the Jewish people, are so fundamentally mistaken, because the work that we're doing is the ultimate act of Zionism. We are actually trying to save the whole enterprise, because if Israel doesn't have borders, if it's not accepted into the region, if it's not recognized by the world, then the quest to create a Jewish and democratic home is not going to work. And so I think that's the most important takeaway, that this is such a fundamentally pro-Israel set of positions to take.
Well potted.
Well, yes. We both probably start and end our days checking what's going on in Israel and reading up on the latest headlines, but also the minutiae. Not a particularly happy thing to be doing more often than not.
About our personal lives, or do you think that's more about the situation?
We'll discuss that another time. If I think of 2 trains traveling on parallel tracks and can they meet, the journey in the 3+ years since the launch of J Street that J Street has been on a remarkable journey. But the journey over the cliff that Israel has been on strikes me as taking place at a far greater velocity, rapidity. If there was something you could add to the train, the engine of the train that J Street is on, to try and catch up and maybe create this meeting point where you can still steer Israel from going off the cliff, what would it be looking back looking back and thinking ahead?
Well, I think that the tipping point is defined by those who are in the center of the political spectrum. I think that
we're talking American Jewish.
The American Jewish spectrum and also the American spectrum.
Okay.
I think that as long as the perception in Israel is that the pressure, let's call it, from the U.S. to change course is coming from a limited group that is on the left of the spectrum, I think it can be disregarded. I think when the understanding comes to be that this is a majority position, that this is not simply longtime peace activists, but this is mainstream American rabbis, mainstream American Jewish community leaders, mainstream American political donors. When we can create that kind of a bulk and a presence, I think that becomes a force that can't be disregarded any longer in Israel. I think it's the only force that Israel will listen to. I think that voice, because it comes out of friendship, because it comes out of a familial relationship, I think it will have the impact that is needed to that any intervention when someone is acting in a way that is counter to their own self-interest, I think that intervention has to come from love and not from force. And I think if the only interventions are from the BDS movement, if it comes from activists who don't express a love of Israel, who don't understand why there's an Israel, if it comes from that perspective, Israel will hunker down and it will just say, well, of course, the whole world is against us. Why do we have to change course? But if the intervention comes out of love, from people who really deeply care about the future, I think we can still change the course of that train, which I agree with you that the train, to extend the metaphor, of Israel that is heading for the cliff is moving too fast with too much momentum behind it for us to stop it the way that we are built right now. But in order to be able to put the brakes on, I think we need to bring to bear the force of the center of this community here.
In that respect, in that American Jewish conversation and in that American political conversation, is the Netanyahu-Lieberman government your greatest ally? Because it's in the context of a Netanyahu-Lieberman government that you'll have a Jeffrey Goldberg finding all kinds of ways of expressing his Gewalt, and an Edgar Bronfman, and you'll have the head of the ADL, Abe Foxman, suddenly saying, no, the boycott law is undemocratic, and Tom Friedman going on to CNN to say this is going to be Jewish apartheid. And I'm sure it's both, but in balance, where does it come out? Or is this rightward trend in Israel ultimately something that, even if less so, still gets reflected in the American Jewish debate? So that debate also goes further to the right.
Well, I think that it's a complex answer, of course, nothing simple. The short answer is yes, that I think that the greatest ally is the actions of and the words of people like Lieberman and further right. It is not simply, Netanyahu is actually the friendly face of this government, but the folks who are, bringing charges against the Meretz party, it's Aryeh Eldad, it's people further to the right of Netanyahu. I think Netanyahu may be the farthest left member of his government. And so it's actually...
That's tweetable.
But I really believe that.
You may get back on his holiday list.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And I think that yes, you're right that makes the case the best. But I don't know that that is enough to break through. I worry that too much time in the established community here is spent determining whether or not you're allowed to bring these issues up in the first place.
And not discussing the issue.
Rather than discussing the issue, right? I mean, rather than actually...
But how did that happen? I mean, I remember when Ariel Sharon pulled out of Gaza, and a lot of his base was screaming. And Ariel Sharon said, when you sit behind the prime minister's desk, the world is different. There are a lot of other issues. And I totally agree with that, totally support it. And at some point, I was in Israel at that time, and remember Gideon Meir, who was the deputy spokesman for the Israeli Foreign Ministry, I posed this question to them. I said, are you at odds, and how do you sort of, and AIPAC and a lot of other organizations were also very frustrated with Sharon's moves. And he says, yes, our diaspora groups, sometimes they help us so much it hurts. But there was still a debate. That wasn't so long ago. And to some degree, from that point, there's been just a big shift. But as you answer, I want you to talk a little bit about your dad, because your dad apparently got discharged from the U.S. Army and then decided to become an Israeli terrorist. and I want to read a segment here. It says, perhaps their most high-profile achievement, meaning the Irgun, I guess, that he was part of, was the purchase and equipping of the Alton. This was a boat, had been mothballed. Your father raised the money to purchase it, led the effort to refit and arm it, and recruited the personnel who would make the transatlantic journey first to Europe and then on to Israel. The ship, loaded with weapons purchased mostly from the French, set sail on June 11, 1948, from the south of France, with my father and over 900 others on board, arriving in the waters just off Israel on June 19th. The one-month-old government of Israel under David Ben-Gurion and the Irgun under Menachem Begin had been negotiating for months over how to deal with the Irgun's arms and men, et cetera, et cetera. Eventually, Yitzhak Rabin was ordered by Ben-Gurion to sink the ship. 16 people were killed. Your father survived. But your dad was essentially, and I've heard other people, including in the Israeli government, refer to the Irgun as Israel's early Hamas. And I know that's provocative, but I suppose this is part of your dad's legacy. The Irgun essentially evolved into what the Likud has become politically, and I would say the Likud is largely, Daniel would disagree, is behaving in ways that are mostly democratic, not always, but there's a big shift from the kinds of armed action they had. But I'd love you to chat a little bit about this, because part of it comes in, part of the debate about whether you are a traitor to Israel and a self-hating Jew comes around the notion of, are you pro-Palestinian? Are you in the positions you've had saying, don't isolate Hamas, essentially embracing an enemy? And given your dad's past, this must be a very painful and complicated issue. And I'd love to hear what you see as the resolution of it, because that resolution is what is going to help, if there is a resolution and strategy that helps create a two-state solution. And I think a lot of the goals of J Street, it's going to have to be resolved, a lot of that past pain. So.
Well, I think there's a couple of issues that I try to surface in the book that relate to what those who were fighting for Israel's independence went through in that liberation movement that are relevant to today. One piece of it is that Alton Lana incident and what happened as a national liberation movement with two different conflicting styles came under one authority and one gun. And the process of bringing in those who fought and were more extreme and more militant underneath an umbrella that brought them together with those who used strategies that were seen as too compromising and maybe too diplomatic and playing along with the people in power rather than fighting them. That process, I think, is paralleled in many, many national liberation movements. And at some point, those who fought and those who were extreme have to make a decision. And they have to either come into the political tent or they have to be defeated. And there comes difficult moments of choice. I think in Northern Ireland, you saw a very critical moment when the IRA decided to come into that tent and lay down the weapons and say, no, we're going to come in. And I think that the decision by Ben-Gurion to fire on the boat was something that really made it clear they weren't going to tolerate any dissent. And I think it was a wrong decision to fire. I think there was a terrible misunderstanding, and I think that the history books still haven't quite all got it right what happened there. But the principle is the same that is facing the Palestinian people today, because you have a movement, Fatah, and another movement, Hamas, that have taken different paths. And eventually, if there's going to be peace, if there's going to be an ability to end this conflict, you've got to have one unified Palestinian polity. And so Hamas and Fatah are going to have to work this out. And they've started in the process of unification, and those who oppose it, I think, are making a terrible mistake. Because in the first instance, the reaction was, well, we can't make peace with the Palestinians because they're divided, because they haven't settled this split. And now that there's movement...
But isn't the worry that the Hamas will end up having a unified gun?
Well, the question is, will they be unified under a political platform that is acceptable to not simply Israel, which obviously will have a strong voice in this, but to the international community as well. And I think that the more that you bring those who have been using militant means into a political process, the more the chances are that you move in the right direction. And so I think there is a parallel there, but the more interesting parallel that I tried to flesh out in the book is not so much around the Alton and the issues in 1948, but really in this country in the 1930s and early 1940s, where you had a group that my father was a part of in this town in Washington, D.C., Palestinian-born Jews who came here to warn the American Jewish community of the impending disaster that was coming in Europe, and sounding the alarm and saying, you don't understand the danger that is about to befall, and you can't play by the rules. You can't just have 5,000 people a year allowed into Palestine, Jews, through legal immigration. You've got to have illegal immigration because we have to get as many Jews out as we can of Europe because there's going to be a disaster. And those voices were shut down. They were not allowed into synagogues. They weren't allowed into communal institutions. People tried to prevent them from raising money. They enlisted the government's help, and they planted informants in my father's offices, and that's now open files in the FBI because the time has passed. They went so far as to draft these activists into the U.S. Army. My father was drafted not because he was a U.S. citizen. My father was a citizen of the British Empire. He was a Palestinian. He was drafted into the U.S. Army as part of the effort to shut down their group, to shut down their voice in Washington, D.C. And he ended up fighting in World War II for the United States because of the result of that effort. So the effort by the establishment in the 1930s to shut down a voice of dissent that's warning of impending doom, to me, has real echoes of what is happening in the Jewish community today, where you have a group of folks who are trying to warn that Israel is on this path that is leading off a cliff, and we need to act, we need to wake up, we need to take action, we need to speak up. And instead of engaging in the substantive discussion, they're trying to shut us down. Now, I haven't been drafted yet. I'm a little old, probably, to be drafted into the Army. But
just wait.
Just wait. But the types of things that are being done, the threatening of people's jobs, the threatening of shutting down organizations that invite us in, the attempt to smear us, the guilt by association, all of these tactics that were used by the left in the 1930s to shut down a right-wing group that my father was, are the parallel of what's happening today when those on the right are trying to shut down the voices of dissent from the left. So I think that's another fascinating parallel I try to draw in the book.
That's obviously paralleled by what's going on inside Israel.
Yeah.
I am having increasing difficulty in the privacy of my own moments, saying we have to save the Jewish and democratic state because of the extent to which the erosion of that democracy looks to me to be setting in. To what extent are you finding allies where you perhaps wouldn't expect them, or you're not finding those allies? As J Street, as you said, tries to win this struggle for the center ground, and being a little bit familiar with the trajectory of J Street's life. I think J Street was born at a certain moment where there was a kind of an immediate pool of interested, concerned, really thoroughly peeved at the extent to which the elements of the American Jewish establishment had gone with the neoconservatives, gone with the Bush administration, and that was an almost an easy first get. A much more challenging second get for J Street was inserting itself into the very heart of that Jewish communal conversation. And we were a year more into that more concerted effort. How's that playing out?
Well, I think it's a real challenge to win over those who aren't naturally the most passionate first adopters. That I think is the challenge of any movement building. And I think in any political dynamic, those who have the most passion are also most likely to have the most hard-edged positions. I often refer, and some of our staff and some of our supporters don't like this, but I refer to the positioning of J Street as being a home for passionate moderates. The ideas that we're putting forward are often nuanced. We often try to come up with a position that in the end probably doesn't satisfy people on either end. We are not going to call for boycotts and divesting and sanctions of Israel. That's just not going to happen as part of J Street, right? And we're going to back Israel's right to defend itself militarily, and we're not going to call for cutting off aid. So there are those who are to our left who say, well, there's no hope. How are you ever going to make change if you don't really
They
threaten?
pillory you all the time.
Right, so from the left, there's always going to be that positioning. And the same thing, from the right, if we're not going to stand by every single thing that Israel ever does. But no, I believe, and this is borne out in every conversation I have, not with the most vocal activists, but with ordinary mainstream American Jews, that most American Jews are in a moderate middle position. And they do value the Jewish and the democratic values on which Israel was founded. They don't want to see a law like was just passed saying that the boycott movement is somehow illegal. It isn't actually technically criminalized. It creates a civil action, this new law. So if you support this, you can actually be sued by those who you are damaging. They don't want to see that kind of action eroding Israel's democracy. They don't want to see Israel acting in ways that is out of touch with the Jewish values on which they were raised. Right? But they also don't want to see the concept of a homeland of the Jewish people lost. And I think that's where the majority of the people are. I don't think we've won over the leadership in the center of the community to take an active leadership position that rocks the boat and stands up and says, this government of Israel is taking us on a path that is unsustainable and will undercut everything we believe in. Right? They're not ready to stand up and say that yet, but in their hearts, that's what they do believe. And so I still think that that's a winnable middle, and I think that's where the game can be changed, is by bringing those people out and getting them engaged.
Passionate moderates, I hadn't really imagined there'd be any rival to the notion of New America's radical centrists. But I do want to get to the audience and involve a Q&A and discussion with the audience. But before we do, I want to just pose one question. When you were called in to meet with President Obama with a group of other Israeli groups, it really did, it was a huge issue. You were much smaller then and sort of fresh off the vine compared to the other institutions, and it really did shake up politically the system. And you're a player in the discussions about how to approach Israel and how to deal with the discussions. P.J. Crowley, I know, is in the audience. There are other State Department people here, or former State Department people, I should say. But what I am really interested in is when you looked at George Mitchell's approach, which was incrementalist, which was based around the settlements as almost a binary sumo wrestling match between one side and the other, and also a kind of incrementalism, and also based on the idea that somehow you could deal with the moderates on the Palestinian side, Salam Fayyad and Mahmoud Abbas, and America wanted to make them look like winners to their people, deliveries. This strategy that many people, given the things, were basically going crazy about, because Daniel and all of us were saying this incrementalist strategy won't work, that the moderates will have legitimacy problems based on what you're going to do, and that if you set yourself up for a binary battle and you lose, then you then turn Netanyahu into your Khrushchev and you look weak, leading to a crisis. You knew all of this. Why do you think that you and your institution have largely failed to show the obvious, or to seduce people inside the administration to see the obvious based on past experiences, based on there are vested interests in this game, but why do you think you failed?
Well, the word that I don't think we've discussed enough, we've been at this for half an hour, we haven't really discussed, is politics.
Right. Well, go at it.
Right. The reason that we started J Street is not because people didn't have ideas about policy and not because people weren't discussing these things in the Jewish community. The reason that we started J Street is because the fundamental block to American policy actually moving in the right direction was politics. And the sense that if you were to stand up and say, America needs to pursue a two-state solution with an active approach, a really proactive, take it to both parties, tell them there are things they have to do, there's tough decisions they're going to have to make, and they have to do it. And bring the international community together, create that consensus, and move forward with an assertive hand. That's just politically infeasible. That's the consensus in this town, that everybody will look, as I say in the book, people will agree with you on all of the policy points. There'll be a lot of nods on Capitol Hill. You can have a closed-door conversation. You can meet at the State Department. You can gather any assortment of policy think tank folks in this town, and everybody will agree on what needs to happen. But then they all look around and they say, well, you can't really say that. You can't expect me to actually vote for that. And if the resolution comes up that says the exact opposite and I'm told I have to go in the opposite way, of course I have to stand up and vote for it. And that's why you get resolutions with 405 votes that run exactly counter to what everybody says you actually need to do. So the reason for that is politics. And the reason we started J Street was to fix the political dynamics and to say, no, a large portion of the Jewish community disagrees with the political vise that the politicians in this town have been put into by a small segment of the American Jewish community who are very vocal, who are very active, who raise a lot of money, and are far to the right of the consensus of the community. And so what we haven't done enough of with J Street is to create enough political power. We have to show and demonstrate that, in fact, if not a majority, then at least a sizable plurality of Jewish Americans are willing to engage in politics around this issue, to donate money, to show up at events, to lobby their elected representatives, and to say no. You do not have to stand up and applaud 29 times when the Prime Minister of Israel is here in order to show that you love Israel. You can stand up once and say you favor a two-state solution and you want to see the president go to Israel and lay down the terms in front of both parties and say this is the time and you've got to do it. And that's being pro-Israel. And that, until we reach that point, until we can change the political understanding that that set of voters who feel Israel right or wrong is the reason that they vote is only 8% of Jewish Americans. And the rest of us vote on everything else just like all other Americans. Until we change these political dynamics, I don't think that the policy conversation is going to get us to where we need to be.
Should we go to the audience?
Yes.
Great. Do we have a mic running? There we do. We've got a great guy with a mic. Let me invite, there's a gentleman right here in the middle, and we'll kind of move as fast as we can. So ask quick questions, and we'll give quick answers and try and take as many as we can.
And if people can introduce themselves, Mitch.
Or we'll introduce you.
You can introduce it. That's great. Is this on?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Mitchell Plitnick, writer. You guys know me. My question kind of is about your last point, Jeremy. I come from that Jewish community that will fight with its last breath, with its last dollar, and with every piece of political energy they have to support the settlements, to support the worst policies of this Israeli government and any Israeli government. Those people have proven over the years that they're willing to do anything and everything it takes. And I have to say, on what I would call our side, I don't see anything like, individuals certainly, but on a group level, I don't see anything like that level of passion, commitment. J Street's own polling routinely shows that Israel is not one of the issues that American Jews and certainly Americans at large vote on. So what are the tools then that you plan to use to change this political dynamic that you're talking about?
So ferociousness or the absence of it on your side.
No, the passion gap is real. I mean, it's the same thing on issues like, let's say, gun control, where you would probably get a solid majority in the country in favoring reasonable, rational gun control, but then the NRA harnesses the people who feel the most passionately and have the strongest views at the margins. And it's a similar dynamic. It's always hard to get the more moderate people to get charged up and actually make their voices heard and in a forceful way. And what complicates the dynamic in our community is that the most politically active progressive and liberal Jews are out there doing that, but they're doing it for women's rights, for gay rights, for the environment, for kids, for education. You name the issue, and that's where the progressive Jewish Americans are engaging. And the folks who are involved in politics, when you understand that a very large percentage of funding for campaigns comes from Jewish Americans, and then the voices that you hear as Jewish representatives come in on right-wing views on Israel, you assume they're speaking for all the Jewish donors that they've gotten and all of the support and all of the fundraisers that have been held and all of the voters and all of the forums, that those limited voices speak for everybody, and they don't. So
given that that's structural, I mean, the idea that people with liberal positions are just not going to be single-issue people, and that if you're an Israel firster, you can just be an Israel firster. How? You're about to go there. But.
Right, no, we have got to spark this passion. I mean, we have got to get people motivated and activated. If they really do care about the health and the structure of the American Jewish community, of the U.S.-Israel relationship, if they care about the future of the State of Israel, They can care about all these other things too, but they have to get engaged on this issue and make their voice heard. And we have got to do a better job of harnessing more and more of those people. We've only been at it 3 years and 2 election cycles. We already have the largest pro-Israel PAC in the country. So through our PAC, through the polling data that we consistently are educating political consultants and staff and elected officials and candidates for office, we're educating them, we are raising money for them, we are connecting the dots, helping them to understand that the large bundlers that they have, who are progressive and liberal on other issues, also support these positions, the pro-Israel, pro-peace positions that we take. They just need a phone call to go into that senator, to go into that member of the House. And those tools together, but it will take time to build a political force that can counter the other side.
Okay, I see the hands right here in the middle, blue shirt, and then right up here in the front.
Yes, my name is Said Erika from Al-Quds Daily newspaper. Stephen Clemons spoke about a vibrant debate that takes place in the Israeli press. You talked about how everybody in this town knows exactly what needs to be done, yet they cannot talk about it. Why do you think this great cover-up, and how would you break it?
And when you get that mic back, that mic has been turned off, so I'm going to ask people not to push any buttons on it. So let's get it back on, and don't push buttons when you're done. But yes.
We heard you. Thank you.
Right. No, I think there is an atmosphere of fear and intimidation that surrounds the discussion on this issue, and people are afraid. Journalists are afraid to write about and talk about this issue because they know the venomous emails and letters to the editor that they'll get. There are academics who worry about what will be their prospects for tenure. There are rabbis who worry about the renewal of their contracts. There are organizations that worry about the way that their largest donors will react if they allow this discussion to take place. So there is an atmosphere that is created, and I talk about it in the book, that stifles debate. It stifles free speech, and it is notably un-Jewish. It is notably undemocratic because I believe that our people and our community, the Jewish community, is one that is given to vigorous debate and that actually has a history and a tradition, and it's what actually is one of its best qualities as a people, is the ability to have these intelligent, wide-ranging discussions that actually further not only our own people, but have actually furthered human relations and human civilization. It is so fundamentally against that tradition that there are efforts to limit debate and to use money and to use tools like guilt by association and lies and smears and all of that to shut down this debate. And so I think that atmosphere in this country has made the debate qualitatively less robust and rich than it is in the state of Israel.
Yes, this gentleman right here.
Good afternoon. Thanks for coming. My name is Tarek. I work with the Avi Schaefer Fund out in California. 2 quick questions based on the last 2 questions that were just asked. One, given the tools that you're using to sort of stimulate the conversation and the debate and get people motivated, just curious to know, what are you selling as the benefits for people to get motivated or for people to get into action around this issue? What's in it for them? What's in it for us? And then 2, where does that fear come from, and how do we deal with it?
Where does that fear, that I was just discussing?
Yeah, the fear in the environment, the fear and the intimidation that exists around discussing this issue, where does that come from, and how do we deal with it?
Well, I think on the first, where the motivation, I hope, within the Jewish community comes from is, first of all, a desire to see the way in which Israel develops and survives be in accordance with who we believe we are as a people. That this is a really gut-level check. That if you've been raised, and as I watch my kids being raised, and I watch my friends' kids being raised, to believe that there are a set of values that are a part of being Jewish, and that those include not wanting to see other people treated in ways that you wouldn't want to be treated yourselves, that include making the world a better place for all, and to respect your fellow human beings. And morality derives from our own sense of how we want to be treated ourselves, not from above. That those fundamental traditions need to be carried out. And when they're not, and when other people speak for us and say, in fact, we are different than that, and in fact, the voice that comes out of our community doesn't reflect our values, I hope the motivation primarily and the satisfaction is finding your voice again, being who you are, speaking out on behalf of the best of our people. And I think that does motivate people. People are pretty pissed off that their voice has been stolen and that there is not a place for them in the organized Jewish community. So I do think at times, I mean, not as I don't want to make any blanket statements, but in many cases. And so I think that part of the motivation and part of the benefit is to find your home again and to have a voice that speaks for you. Where does the fear and the intimidation come from? In many cases, it is a small number of right-of-center funders. If you look at situations which are public, where synagogues have canceled events or where pressure on Hillels has happened, it's very clear that it is from a very limited number of right-of-center funders. And it's the exact same dynamic in politics, that it is a handful of the larger bundlers and political funders who have a direct line into elected officials and who have, for decades in many cases, established personal relationships that define what it means to be pro-Israel, as to be standing up for Israeli government policy, right or wrong, and often to the right of the Israeli government. And so the pressure, I believe, comes from a limited number of donors and funders in the Jewish community who are right of center politically.
But there is the chatter too. I mean, I just know in the blogosphere and in people comment, there's a great book that was done by William Safire about early 19th century, late 18th century, what we called scandal mongering. And it was the pamphleteers that had very few bounds on what they would write or say. One of these pamphleteers, James Callender, was the one that was harassing Hamilton on his affairs and then harassing Jefferson, but inventing stories. And to a certain degree, there's a scandal mongering that is taken on where that you have a combination of ferocious debate and battle, which I have no problem with, but then along with it becomes very insidious slander and insinuations about folks, and that climate is very toxic. And so to the gentleman who's asking about fear, if you're high profile in this community on these issues, I know it because when Daniel Levy came here and we started getting in this business, if you're a think tank in Washington, D.C., and you decide, hey, I want to be as quoted as Brookings or as AEI or as Winnep in the New York Times pieces on Israel-Palestine issues, that is a tough racket to break into without being raked over the coals by everyone. We've done it. We did it very rapidly, but we did it with a very focused strategic plan of importing that debate from Israel, linking it to the legitimacy of that debate in Israel. I see it a little bit differently than Jeremy, that what I fear is going on in Israel is this kind of weird re-importation of Washington-style constraints on their own civil society. It's bizarre. So, but that is my own speculation.
Have you been surprised at I mean, it seems to me like there's a tag team sometimes. That there are the people who maintain a distance from directly dirtying their hands with the more egregious examples of personal vilifications and attacks on J Street, but there are others out there who that's their business to do. I've been surprised. I don't know if you have, at the extent to which J Street has been subject to that.
Oh, and what I get so irritated by is the failure of mainstream leaders to speak out and call that out and to say that is simply unacceptable in our community. I mean, that the tag team is sort of facilitated by silence. There can be all the initiatives you want in the world from mainstream Jewish groups to promote civility, right, and to encourage a more open debate. But if you never call out the people who call us names and slander us and attack us in very personal ways, then what good is a civility initiative? I don't understand how it is that the mainstream can watch these things go on and not call them out. So that's surprised me even more than the 100 talkbacks in Haaretz that call me things that I wouldn't want to repeat publicly.
I also just want to say, before I go to this gentleman right in the front, we'll hop around and cluster a few questions, but that I think the left, I know this is provocative to a lot of people in this room, but the left engages in exactly the same behavior, and they exact in the same kind of defaming way of those people on the right there. So if you're going to be genuinely in the middle, which I've seen you do, it is a very tough position because you often have to have odd bedfellow conversations and odd bedfellow
I would say not on this issue inside the Jewish community. There is
maybe
not.
So. Maybe so. Right here,
left.
yes. And we'll go to Al right behind you.
Hi, my name's Rob Prager. I work on the Hill as an intern. I'm just curious about the way in which you describe J Street as a centrist movement, because it strikes me that that compared to AIPAC, who brand themselves as a truly bipartisan organisation, J Street naturally, obviously being on the left, obviously is more attractive to the Democrats because the Republicans are so committed to everything Israel does, we have to support. I'm just curious whether you think that an inherent problem that you have is the fact that you're never going to get bipartisan support from any Republican because their position is automatically, no way, Jose.
I can
Why do you
translate.
think? Why would you? I mean, I would totally.
These Boston accents are really confusing.
As the former director of the Nixon Center, I would challenge your premise very much. I would say that actually, when you look at the Democratic and Republican, and when Jeremy answers, when you look at the Democratic and Republican subscriptions and wherever they may be, when I look at the Brent Scowcroft, George Voinovich, Chuck Hagel crowd, many of whom are disappearing, but the notion that no Republicans would is absolutely untrue. Because there are.
But name a current senator.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's difficult. But the point is the definitiveness. Richard Lugar. Long
So
may
that's
he
one.
live and be around. But my point is, and I just wanted to challenge, push back a little bit, the notion of strong definitiveness in what a party would do. The division on this issue is not party versus party. It's within both parties. Most major national security issues today are not Republican versus Democrat. They are cleavages within both parties. So you answer your own question, but yeah, go ahead.
Sure, I think that's a fair point. What I would say is I was at a meeting today, a bipartisan meeting with the foreign policy advisor in my office. I work for a Democrat, and the Republican advisor in the other office. And there was a group of 30 Israelis there, and they were talking about the differences, they were talking about this issue really, about why America is such a pro-Israel country. And the Republican staff there basically said, well, us Republicans, we love Israel, and as a country, as a group of people, as a party that states to love Israel, sure, we accept that not everything Israel does is right, but on the whole, as a group, as an organization, we love Israel because our passion and our love for the country and our roots as a democratic. Our roots is, and he talked about the connection between America as a true democracy and Israel as a democracy, and the democratic rhetoric, which I've heard not only at the meeting but in general and also from Obama, is definitely to the left, and maybe
that Israel's not a country to love or not.
No.
Right, this is a warped. I mean, it's a warped definition of what it means to be pro-Israel. I mean, one of the fundamental problems that we're trying to change with J Street is the notion that the only way to quote unquote be pro-Israel is to simply love everything that the government of Israel does. Well, unfortunately, the government of Israel right now is driving the country off a cliff, right? And so the pro-Israel point of view is actually, in my view and in J Street's view, to try to help shift the direction in which that train is going. And if you stand up and you criticize the policies of the government of Israel, that is a fundamentally pro-Israel act. That is something that is in the interest of the state of Israel. So, and in the existence, in the long-term future and security of, in the nature of Israel. So the conversation is so warped in this town that the only way to define yourself as being pro-Israel is in that way, to say, well, we just stand by Israel no matter what it does, no matter where it goes, no matter what it's going to say.
But it's I'm really glad you raised this. It's a very interesting frame. And I'll tell you, when my blog, The Washington Note, initiated the battle against John Bolton's confirmation vote to serve as ambassador to the United Nations, I had a lot of Republican supporters that were leaking material and involved with that debate. It ended up being the Republicans controlled Congress in both chambers. But it was Chuck Schumer, and this was out in the public and everything. Chuck Schumer, in the third effort of the Bush administration to push Bolton through, went into the Democratic caucus and said to everyone, we have to support Bolton because a vote against Bolton is a vote against Israel. And that was a remarkable statement of the Democratic caucus, and the rawness of it and the overtness of it actually sabotaged Bolton, because that had just become too evident in that kind of thing. But I would just, again, that was inside the Democratic caucus in the fight that had come in. It's just very interesting that you've had this experience, but I don't discount.
I do just.
But I do want to raise the fact that I think that it is both parties. And when I listen to Joe Biden, whom I admire greatly, but every chance he gets talks about the unconditionality of the U.S.-Israel relationship, it makes me crazy, because every state has conditions on its relations. Every state. But yes.
And the way it plays out for me, because an argument that is commonly used is Israel is a democracy and you have to allow and respect the outcome of the democratic process in Israel. I would argue that the way America inserts itself into that conversation skews Israeli democracy. No other country in the world that I can think of conducts a democratic system under the conditions that Israel does, because of the way America intervenes in that. My problem in the politics, party politics here, is, to be perfectly frank, other than the president and a very small group, you don't have an attempt on the Democratic side to articulate an alternative J Street-like position on what is pro-Israel. You won't have the Democrats saying, well, no, Republican X, that's not pro-Israel, this is pro-Israel. 90% of the time, you'll have them saying, no, honestly, really, really, I promise, we're just as pro-Israel as the other side. And having ceded the ground on that debate immediately. And on the Republican side, what has happened is what you described, Steve, is almost absent today from the congressional Republican caucus. And here is where I have a real problem. Because Glenn Beck, Republican pro-Israelism, I mean, they're actually taught in Israel today. I don't know if people are familiar with this. What is it? Restoring courage? Restoring hope?
Courage.
Courage. Rally that's due to take place. I understand that the Israeli authorities are now intervening regarding the location of that rally, because they understand that if this guy holds the rally close to the Temple Mount where he wants to hold it, there could be a bloodbath for Israel. And it's that kind of insanely irresponsible pro-Israelism that I think needs to be called out. And instead of calling it out, you have the John Hagees of this world receiving rapturous applause, rapturous probably being an interesting choice of word, at AIPAC and other Jewish communal gatherings. And I think there's a possible backlash.
It's interesting. Let's go right here, Alan. We're going to cluster. My gosh, we open up
cluster.
Very fast. With this, we don't have much time. So we've got, if you look back, there are 40 questions up there. So fast.
Let me ask about conditions and red lines. What do you, in your discussions with Jewish moderates or members of Congress, what policies could Israel undertake or has undertaken that might cross the red lines to arouse American public or Congress to enlist in a more objective appraisal of Israeli policy?
Pen. So red lines. We're going to cluster on. Let's go on this side now. Okay, these two here. We'll go real fast. Just quick. Take the mic, and if you don't, the mic's not there. So fast. Yes.
I do have a very quick question. My name is Becca. I'm a statistics major at Harvard College, and I'm an intern in the Near East South Asia
need you to get to
division
the question.
of the U.S. Office of Opinion Research for the summer. So that informs this question, which is about your polling data, which you've talked about a lot. I'm very interested in survey methodology, so I'm wondering, when you take those polls of American Jews, who is a Jew? Is it just self-identification, or do you actually ask about matrilineal descent? Because I would...
Self-identification.
Okay.
Okay, great. That's off. Okay.
Martin Klings, bureau chief of the German weekly Die Zeit.
Yeah.
I have a brief question. When you look at the development in the United Nations, what is J Street's opinion about the
September
resolution,
showdown?
the September showdown? Thank
Cool.
you.
Right behind you. I love this. Can we have questions like this all the time? Go ahead.
Since Kufi is meeting in town these days, what's your take on that? What's your relationship with that kind of John Hagee and rapturous applause of that kind of right-wing Israeli?
Excellent. Let's take a question on this side. This gentleman here in the middle in the white shirt.
Hi. Do you feel that openly critical Jews of Israel in America will increase anti-Semitism? Because in Britain, often when things happen in Israel, there is an increase in anti-Semitism, such as Operation Castlet.
Okay. And then one on this side over here. The next hand, sort of on the right side, I can't tell who that is.
That's me.
There we go. Yeah. Oh,
Nadia.
Good.
Hi, it's Nadia Bilbesi. I just got back actually from the West Bank, and it's the first time I've noticed that people are very pessimistic than ever. And one of the arguments I put forward is if Israel has to choose between being Jewish and democratic, they will go for being Jewish, which makes the solution ultimately very, very difficult to compromise on. Considering the rise of the right wing in Israel and the religious parties, do you agree with this assessment?
Jewish versus Democratic. Okay, and we'll take one more.
And people should still introduce themselves.
Yeah, that's Nadia Bilbasi Charters. Yes.
Mark Braverman. Can we just get back to BDS? Perhaps I'm asking you maybe personally to talk about whether you think it can be part of a movement, assuming that it can't be part of the J Street platform given your positioning.
For those watching online, will you say what BDS is?
The Palestinian call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions.
Okay, great.
Against
So
Israel.
that was point number 3. So,
So can I get the list?
yeah. So red lines. What are the red lines that would that Israel would cross to decrease the unconditionality of the relationship?
I think when the values and interests are glaringly at odds between the two countries, then the red lines have been crossed. I think some of the actions that are being taken to undercut Israeli democracy that include investigations into NGOs, that include the actions that were taken against the boycott, divestment, sanction movement, those are going to call into question the shared interests and shared values between the two countries. I think those are where the red lines are.
So
most
those who
likely.
wanted to really sabotage the relationship, wouldn't they promote the further crossing of these red lines?
The more that Israel becomes undemocratic, the more that it moves away from those shared values, the more that the relationship, I think, is going to be
I often
called
think
into
the BDS movement has a direct line into the Israeli cabinet meetings.
Okay.
Next.
We did how you polled
Yes.
who's a Jew.
Self-identified.
The September showdown.
UN.
Your
Look,
views.
I mean, our position is that the resolution passing the General Assembly will not enhance the likelihood of a resolution of the conflict. So our view is the U.S. and the international community through the quartet should be acting now ahead of the UN vote to actually put a real plan on the table that the parties have to take seriously and are called to account to say yes or no to. So we should take action as the United States and as the quartet to avert a one-sided UN vote in September and see something happen between now and then.
And do you see that happening?
No, and I mean, it may be a source of amusement that it's not happening, but it should be a source of deep concern because I think we're moving in the wrong direction. We're moving away from a agreed-upon resolution of the conflict. If we're moving away from that, we're moving towards conflict, and that's not good for any of us.
I didn't capture the reference to the Kufi meeting, but this question about Hagee and those Christians United for Israel. What is your
Yeah, no, I mean, I talk about
perspective?
that in the book. I mean, that's something that I do address. The alliance that the establishment of the American Jewish community is striking with the Kufi movement and with the right wing of the Christian evangelical movement, not all Christian evangelicals, the right wing political Zionists of the Christian right, is unnatural and unhealthy. It doesn't make any sense to ally for our community, for the Jewish community, to ally with a group of people that are so fundamentally at odds with us on every single issue, and at the end of the day do not have the best interests of either Israel or the Jewish people at heart in the way in which they're approaching this issue. So the alliance with people like John Hagee, with Glenn Beck, I mean, this is just ludicrous and is at odds with what 3/4 of Jewish Americans, if not more, think and believe.
Do Jews who are critical of Israel in society increase anti-Semitism?
No. In fact, I think that it's just the opposite. That I think that a lack of criticism, a lack of standing up for our values, a lack of applying our values to Israel, to that conversation is going to make people call into question, well, maybe they're not serious about their values in the first place. So I think absolutely not the right thing for the Jewish community to do is to stand up for their values and to apply them when it comes to Israel.
Yeah, I don't know. I just want to comment on this because it's very important in my own development, which some folks don't know. Are any American Jewish Committee people here, AJC people? In Los Angeles, I really admire the AJC people. I helped a man named Neil Sandberg establish the Pacific Rim Institute of the American Jewish Committee because we saw this flaming rise of anti-Semitism in Japan, of all places. And one of the ways in which we were trying to sort of deal with that is to increase the exposure of Japanese businessmen who were investing and involved there. We took some delegations of rabbis and others over to Tokyo and we had like 100 seders that were done for the people came into. But what's interesting, and it's, you know, I'm not Jewish, so I don't get all the terminology. I sort of thought somebody described me as Jewish meant wrestling with God, but I guess it was the dinner that was wrestling with God. But in it, the Japanese that were so conformist and had this, you know, very distant view, saw these ferocious debates about all sorts of issues. And I do have a view that it created a very negative or blowback against that anti-Semitism in Japan. So I know it's a little bit out of left field, but it does show that debate and people seeing that debate, I think in this case, decreased anti-Semitism rather than increasing it.
By the way, the word Israel means wrestling with God.
That's what I got wrong. So I was close to it, Israel wrestling with God. I love that.
BDS.
We had another one that said something
BDS.
about
BDS.
BDS, yes.
So, look, we as a movement don't support any movement that doesn't recognize the right of Israel to exist, the right of Israel to defend itself.
Is this the BDS, the so-called
This is the global BDS movement. I mean, the Palestinian call for BDS that doesn't acknowledge the right of the Jewish people to a nation of their own, alongside the legitimate right of the Palestinian people to a nation of their own. So until such time as that movement adopts as part of its fundamental principles that it recognizes the right of a state of the Jewish people to exist as well, there's no chance that J Street can affiliate with or support that. That doesn't mean that individuals who individually make decisions to pursue these things can't be part of J Street. That's their business, and people should be given the freedom to say and do what they want. And that's why I'm so opposed to the law in Israel that just passed related to BDS. But in terms of a place
what about the no platforming of supporters of BDS within the Jewish community here?
Right, I think that's ridiculous. You know, we invited to our conference a BDS activist to defend the BDS movement, the head of Jewish Voice for Peace. I'm very proud that she was at our conference. We've taken enormous heat for having her at the conference, but it's ridiculous to say, and we're arguing for ourselves, that you have to create an open space for disagreement. And so how can we argue for that if we don't invite BDS activists to take part in our own discussions?
We have a zillion questions out there, and I think that the best way to get those questions answered is to get people with some wine and soda and have them buy your book and come talk to you at that table and have you sign it to them. I just want to say, you know, I'm so grateful to you for the role. I mean, you took some tough questions, and I think that you continue to play a very key role in this debate and dialogue. I am a great fan of a senator who's no longer in the Senate. It was Chuck Hagel, and Hagel would often talk about this dilemma of neither selling short or abandoning Israel's security or interests and livelihood, but not saying that you can't concomitantly look at the needs and stability of the Arab side of that equation. And if you don't, that one side will lose. That if you've got this hyper zero-sum dynamic, that it will not only sink the region. What I care a lot more about is sinking America's strategic interests, frankly, because it's become that the consequences of failing to get a two-state solution no longer matter to just those people. They matter to us because it's a defining challenge. And I really want to thank Daniel Levy for all the work you've done and Jeremy for the work you've done in this. So I don't know if you have any closing thoughts, but I want to thank you in advance of them for all your work.
Great. So let me just also close with a thank you to New America. J Street wouldn't be what it is today. We wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for my friend Daniel Levy, if it wasn't for everything that he was involved in, the thinking and the conceiving. So I thank you for that. And I thank Steve, who is constantly pushing the envelope in this town. All of you know that. He is helping to transform the debate and the discussion on so many issues, not just this issue. So I thank you for that. And I thank so many of the people in this room. I recognize many, many friends of mine personally and friends of J Street institutionally and of our movement. There are people who've been at this for a very long time, people who are relatively new. I just want to say this is a movement. This is a movement that needs your help. I hope that you will not only read the book, I hope you'll become engaged in our work, because we do have to redefine this issue away from a zero-sum game towards a win-win solution. To be pro the creation of a Palestinian state is to be pro-Israel. It is a fundamental existential interest of the state of Israel and of the Jewish people to see a Palestinian state living side by side with Israel in peace and security. We have to make it happen. We will only make it happen if the dynamics of American politics shift, and that'll only happen with people's personal involvement. So I thank all of you who have been involved. I urge you to get involved. I look forward to talking to you more about it.
And the book is on sale just outside.
Great. Thank you all very much for coming.